handling my post without wearing rubber gloves. I think if the virus can be spread by people just touching hard surfaces, then it could be on the surfaces of envelopes. Am I being too neurotic or just sensible? I mean, everyone's talking he's come up with the specific example of envelopes, hasn't he? But people are talking about bank machines. You know, you just think about everything that you're touching and who might have touched it beforehand.
And again, this is really difficult, and it's really hard to advise someone not to take precautions to minimise the risk of infection. What I will say is always look up the current advice coming out from Public Health England, and there actually is a report that's come out from Public Health England to say there is currently no documented evidence from the China outbreak that there has been infection through infected post and so forth. That said, it's really important to maintain sort of good practices to minimise risk. There is evidence that the virus can survive on surfaces for a few hours. So again, I would emphasise the need for following good hygiene practices. And if you are in a particularly high-risk situation, if you feel you've been in contact with confirmed cases, then it is really important to take these kind of precautions to minimise risk.
John on Twitter asks, should the UK government not be doing more? Albania has 2 coronavirus cases and has decided to shut all schools for 2 weeks and stop all travel from Italy into Albania.
This is a really, really hard call, and I suspect we might see some decisions being made in the next few days as to exactly what's going to happen as we see our cases increase. We are in a situation of what we currently call the sort of containment phase, where we're dealing with most of the cases that have come into the country have been through people travelling back into the UK or through direct contact with those people. But of course, this is an evolving situation, and we've seen over the weekend the number of cases has started to rise. So it's always a really difficult trade-off, because if we want to minimise risk, then of course we need to start putting in these kinds of isolation measures, but that needs to be traded off against the cost of those isolation measures taking place. Any sort of decision like this obviously needs to be made taking into account the current risk on a national level. And I suspect over the coming days we'll have a much better understanding of, how much risk there might be, and we may see that the government advice may change.
And I just want to go back to the point that you made in your first answer about the symptoms that people might be showing and whether or not it may actually be coronavirus. People may have had coronavirus without even realising. You said, if you've got like minor flu or even cold symptoms, they're all quite different symptoms, but the symptoms that we're told to look out for coronavirus are specific. It's the temperature, it's the lack of breath, and the deep chesty cough. So how is there so much potentially that other, like a cold could be a sign of it?
Well, I think the problem that we have with coronavirus is that there is a whole range of severities of symptoms depending upon the individual. Some people may literally just have a cold and a cough, and essentially, as we've said, just think they've got some form of flu, and then they will recover. And in the more severe cases, they will start to get sort of respiratory difficulties, and it could be much more serious. And this is the real challenge that we've had. And as I said earlier, there is evidence to suggest that actually there may be some proportion of the individuals in the population who are almost asymptomatic, so essentially are infected but don't really have any symptoms. That's what makes this disease really hard to get ahead of. And of course, the other aspect of it is it's complicated by the incubation period of the disease. So people can be infected for up to 2 weeks and not show any symptoms before they start to have these sorts of symptoms. So that's why it's actually very, very difficult to put in the right measures to try to control the outbreak.
It's been great to talk to you, Mike Tildesley, Associate Professor of Infectious Diseases at the University of Warwick. Thank you very much for answering our viewers' questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.